This is Liberty Law Talk, part of Liberty Fund's online library of law and liberty. Your host is Liberty Fund Fellow Richard Reinsch. Our web address is libertylawsite.org, where you can subscribe, comment, find other episodes and links related to today's conversation. Our email address is lal@libertyfund.org. Today we are talking with Roger Scruton about his latest novel, The Disappeared. Roger Scruton is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He's a writer and philosopher, author of over 40 books, including several works of fiction. He has taught in England and in North America at various universities and been a visiting professor in Britain and America. He now lives as a freelance writer in Wiltshire, England. Roger, glad to have you on the program.
Well, I'm glad to be on it. Thank you.
Roger, why did you write The Disappeared?
Very good question. Why does one write anything? I guess I had a picture in my mind which has been shaping over quite a few years of the situation, first of all, of the teacher in the modern world, and secondly, of young people growing up in an atmosphere of official multiculturalism where they don't really know what the culture is to which they're supposed to belong, and the confrontation underlying all this between our rather exhausted post-Christian world and the incoming and far from exhausted Islamic world. So I thought, bring all these together, because we've been seeing in Britain exactly all the conflicts that have been emerging from this. I thought I'll bring them all together in a particular dramatic encounter and see if I could work it out.
So, just thinking about the title, who or what has disappeared in Britain?
Well, the title is ambiguous, of course, and multiply ambiguous. In the story, various people disappear because it's a story about people trafficking. As along with other things. But of course, underlying it all, there is the disappearance from our society of the old ideas of authority, the old religion, the old sense of belonging. And I wanted to bring that together with the actual disappearance of people.
So we've got, to my mind, we've got really 5 characters in the novel, all of whom working on various pieces, various problems that they've encountered, dramatic problems.
Yeah.
And as the novel moves forward, what we start to realize is they're all basically dealing with the same set of facts and the same major problem, and that really comes down to sex trafficking within council flats in a city in northern England, Yorkshire, and this is truly horrific. I want to talk about one character in particular, Sharon Williams. Williams. So how does it come to pass in present-day Britain that a girl, 16 years of age, would, in effect, be left to fend for herself by pretty much everyone except for this teacher who emerges in the novel, Stephen Haycraft, who is her literature teacher?
Yeah, well, Sharon's story is actually not an unusual one. She's a child of neglectful parents, drug addicted, probably, who have sort of essentially abandoned her. So she's taken into care by the local council. This is one of the responsibilities that the councils have in Britain, and there are an awful lot of these girls taken into care, especially in those northern cities where there are real social problems. And then the council puts her into a home as an adopted child. There was a certain stage, they look around for parents who can take the thing off their hands. So she's put into the hands of a working class family. At the time, it looks as though that's a good solution. It's a family with a father in place, a few boys and children of that marriage, and so on. but of course, and they're living in a council flat in a big, rather sinister tower block called Angel Towers. Then, the inevitable happens. The man leaves. Other men come in. She becomes a target for the interests of other people, and in particular interests of the immigrant families in the neighborhood, in particular a Muslim family from, ultimately from Afghanistan, but also from Yemen, and then she becomes a target of grooming and sexual abuse, and so is a kind of rape victim from the age of 15 onwards.
So this, and we were talking before the interview. You wrote the novel before the Rotterdam report was published and released, but largely we're talking about a similar problem that in the novel and also in the Rotterdam report. So in that report, what we learn is for over a decade, and particularly in these northern towns and in the United Kingdom, we've got basically rape gangs, primarily of Pakistani British men who are, in effect, they are grooming these girls. Maybe we can be very precise about what that means. And, in effect, trafficking them, applying them with drugs, alcohol. And these girls are largely like Sharon Williams. They are without parents. They are largely alone. And there's just really no accountability for what happens to them for over a decade until the facts just become impossible to ignore. Exactly. And that's kind of what we see in the novel.
Yeah, exactly. In the novel, of course, I don't talk about Pakistani gangs. Yeah. I make the two villains into essentially Yemenis of Afghan origin, because I didn't want to raise the whole issue of communities and all that, but I did want to raise the issue of the disparity between the Muslim view of women and the surrounding culture. And the Muslim view, in particular, of people from a place like Yemen, is that a girl is pure as long as she's protected, but if she is taken advantage of, if she's lost her purity, then she's fair game for anyone. And of course, the surrounding girls, being all white and not Muslims, are fair game anyway. And once you've got them, you're entitled to use them as objects rather than as people. And this is what has happened to her. But she is very much a person, and with a huge intelligence. And in the book, I present really 4 women, all of whom are distinguished by their brains. Yes. I mean, there's her, there's Laura, who's a high-flying, normal middle-class person who's going somewhere, who is kidnapped in the place of her, and Muhibba, who's the sister of the villains whom they're protecting as something pure, and also has to use her intellect to try and get out of the situation in which she is, namely trapped in a Muslim family, and to be, as it were, sold in marriage to the effective, to her parents' choice and all the rest. And then there's Iona, the social worker, who has to deal with all these things, who is a kind of lefty, politically correct by her education, but sees the reality and tries to find a solution.
On this question of price in women and different parts of Muslim culture, religion, that this emerges out of. This also was in the Rotterdam report as well, and particularly in dealing with these rape gangs and how they understood their victims. This was there and very hard to ignore. In particular, we have in one case, just thinking about this, Muhibba says to Justin Fellows, who is an eco corporate junior executive of some kind, or rising within a for-profit eco renewal corporation. He makes houses that are carbon neutral.
Exactly.
And so we find him. He's attracted to Muhibba, and actually brings her into his company. She's running accounts for him and doing various tasks for him, and he's very attracted to her, and she is unavailable to him in many ways, and he realizes this. And she says to him at one point that I'm priceless, and I'm priceless.
Yeah.
I'm priceless within my family, and I'm a gift, and I'm a gift that my family makes to another family. This is, in a way, we've got that stark portrayal, and then we've also got sort of the easy come, easy go sort of understanding of sexuality reverberating in Western liberal democracies. I think about those two contrasts, and then we've got something else happening as well, which is degradation. Is the only way to put it. But something else. There's something interesting. It's almost politically incorrect in your novel. I suppose there's a lot that's politically incorrect by current standards. Both men. We've got Justin Fellows and Stephen Haycraft coming back to the teacher, who are, there's nothing particularly conservative about them, but both of them realize that they have tasks of protecting innocent women as they understand them.
Absolutely. Both of them are in search of their manhood in just the way that the women are in search of their womanhood. But of course, the old man-woman distinction has disappeared. It's one of the other things that's disappeared. And they're having to find their own way to it. And in Stephen's case, it's precisely the appeal made to him by Sharon, made very intelligently, so he can't avoid it. That awakens the man in him to disastrous effect, of course. And in the case of Justin, he's been looking for his manhood, in other ways through his addiction to heavy metal and all that. But also, Meheba arouses him exactly that need to protect. And because of her purity, she drags him out of the ordinary, easygoing sexual relations to which he is accustomed, and gives him another sense of what it might be to be a man, and it's disastrous for him in a way too.
Yeah, no, interesting as well. I mean, I wasn't expecting as I started to read the novel. So Stephen Haycraft, just a little bit of his backstory, is he's an Oxford graduate, does not go into the academy, although he had wanted to. Had wanted to be a journalist, didn't really succeed there, and he's kind of in a fallback position of teaching at St. Catherine's Academy, which was once a Roman Catholic school for boys, and is now part of the general government education system. Interesting note as well, the chapel of the school is under lock and key. And that's where he goes. That's where he goes to think or to sort through things. At one point, even to read and I want to talk about the Kassab family in the novel. Stephen, as you noted, is attracted to Sharon. It's the 16-year-old girl, and she appeals to him, and she's telling him what's going on, the hell of life in the Angel Towers, the council flats, through the Tempest. Talk about that and how that works on him, but also how he finds the way really to sublimate, I suppose, his eros from overwhelming their relationship.
Right. Well, what she does, she has, as it were, already conceived, because of her brain and her imagination. She was already conceived a love of literature. Being at the school is the only safe place for her, and in school she's studying Shakespeare and other texts, The Great Gatsby, and all the A-level, what we call the A-level syllabus. And The Tempest is the play that she has to study with Stephen. So she uses the symbol she uses the play in order to represent in symbolic form to him through her essays exactly what is going on in the horrible world around her, while at the same time trying to point out that she is innocent, really, that she has kept her purity through this, and that she wants to give it to him. And she does this very cleverly because, obviously he's got to read these essays, and she's constantly using her language in order to display her very sensitive soul. and so he's got to respond. He can't respond just as a teacher. He's got to respond in some other way, and that's what he does do, of course. But he also has to. He's also being told through the as it were, between the lines, the messages, save me. I'm in real trouble. I'm in real danger, and he knows that that nobody else is going to save her. He goes to the town council to try and get the social workers involved, and Iona, who understands the problem, doesn't want to get involved because she knows that the huge consequences of getting involved in problems that involve immigrants. So eventually he comes to the conclusion that he alone can save her, and he, essentially Sharon manipulates him into a position where he has to try, and she ends up living with him.
Yeah, the interesting in these essays that she writes to him, we learned that one of her friends was in effect captured, and was the victim of sex trafficking, and somewhere sent into Eastern Europe to Russia. I'm forgetting what you say in the novel, but this is sort of, I mean, I think a wave of realization that comes across Stephen as well, that his sort of, not to say indifference, but rather sort of acceptance of the official line about immigration and life, amongst the working class or underclass is actually quite vicious, and this sort of realization comes across him, and indeed, as you say, he's really the only one who can save Sharon. Yeah. He turns to official authorities, and I mean, I think there's also your work in your educational critique here. He turns to the social worker that we mentioned, Iona, and he reads to her part of her essay, which is from The Tempest, and the social worker says, "Well, she's obviously a racist." And referring to the Asian community in the flat, and he says, "What do you mean? This is Shakespeare." She's just quoting Shakespeare. It's a play on his language, and I took it as you were saying, we're a nation of demi-educated therapeutic experts who are afraid of the truth or of expressing the truth.
Well, yes. I mean, that I didn't want to say that, but I just to show it. That this is the situation in which we find ourselves. It's inevitably, and we have there's one of the themes of the novel, of course, is the eradication of our ability to perceive social truths by the official political correctness. The police, in particular, who also appear in the novel, have been subject to essentially silencing orders, not to speak about certain things because it would be offend the official multiculturalist doctrine, the doctrine that that the immigrants don't have different values, or rather their values are to be accepted and not to be criticized, and all the rest.
Yeah, I mean that's also the way I understand it, the idea that official authorities will speak only with sort of the appointed private authorities of these communities on various matters, and will let them run things, but won't actually peer or pry. So part of, you mentioned in the novel, through a conversation that Stephen has with a police officer, or is it, no, I'm sorry, Justin Fellows has with a police officer about the disappearance of Muhiba, who he believes has been kidnapped by her family. We learn later it's more complicated than that. The police officer of some rank, reluctant to intervene, and he cites the McPherson report. What was that? Is that still reverberating around, even in light of the Rotherham report and the ruckus that it's caused?
It's from before the Rotherham report, and it concerned there was a case of a black boy being murdered by various white thugs while he was standing at a bus stop in London. It was a terrible thing, and it wasn't properly reported or properly investigated by the police, so the case had to be reopened. And at the same time, because of all the complaints that this was a racist attack and that the police were covering it up, a senior judge, Scottish judge, who was called in, McPherson, to conduct this investigation and report on it. And he reported that the police that all the facts show that the police in England are essentially a racist or institutionally racist. That's a piece of jargon taken over from leftist sociology in order to describe the entire police force. And of course, the result of this was hugely demoralizing. And the police, the immediate reaction of the police is to say, exactly as this superintendent does, we're going to steer clear of the immigrant communities. We're not going to ever get to expose ourselves to the possibility of this accusation, because it will just simply undermine all the work that we're doing. So this had the negative effect of meaning that the immigrant communities are no longer properly policed. And that's what we see not only in my novel, but also in the Rotherham case. They haven't been policed at all. And when somebody tried to report on this, all her funding was withdrawn, and she herself was marginalized and essentially almost criminalized for having said the truth.
We've got, interesting in just tying this together with the plight of Muhibba, who is a woman who wants to enter British society on her own terms and wants to enter largely without her culture and religion behind her, but has something of a modern liberal Democrat. She says she's an atheist. And yet she can't. And the reasons why she can't are actually tied to what we're discussing. That is to say, we have the aversion of official authorities to actually allow individuals within these communities to come out and be on their own, precisely because there is this official private authority that's just kind of upheld and inhibits actually a healthy individualism from emerging and from actually seeing that develop. And so we get something like it's a strange. The novel, as I was thinking about it, we've got a welfare state, we've got multiculturalism, and then we've got kind of, in some dialectical way, working a cult of autonomy. All of this sort of leads to wolves preying on sheep, in my mind. And in the end, Muhibba, not only can she not leave, she's actually murdered by someone from her community for her involvement in trying to set right what she realizes her two brothers have been doing, which is sex trafficking.
Exactly, yeah. And she, although she wants to move from her community, and although she is, in her own way, somewhat calculating way, in love with Justin, her purity remains at the top of her agenda through all these things, because that's what her education in the Muslim family has induced in her. This sense that a conception of her sexuality which she cannot possibly discard, and in a sense that's a really admirable thing that she can't discard it, but it leads her inevitably in a tragic direction.
Yeah, the interesting. We're talking about Islamic families. There's another Islamic family in the novel, the Kassab family, and so we have two boys in this family. They're Shiite Muslims from Iraq. They make their way to England. They're also in the council flats, but this father is, I suppose we could say, liberal. He makes a point at one point, although without losing his Islamic faith in any sense. He makes a statement to his sons, if I remember correctly, that the gates of interpretation aren't closed or shouldn't be closed, and that's. I think that's a profound statement in terms of thinking about creative renewal within Islam. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, well, Abdul Kassab is my sort of hero in all this, in a way.
Yeah.
He is somebody who brings he comes to England, first of all, legitimately. He's somebody who's been put into an impossible situation by being an interpreter for our forces during the capture of Basra in the old Saddam Hussein conflict. So he has to be rescued, and he's genuinely grateful. He wants to integrate. He doesn't want to lose his Islamic faith, and he's also a scholarly person, a school teacher himself, who's immersed in that beautiful old Shiite and Sufi tradition, which was centered on Basra originally, and he teaches this to his children, to his two sons. And his view is, yes, here we are in another world from the one that we were brought up in, but we can adapt to it, and we can adapt our faith to it, because our faith doesn't tell us to impose ourselves on others regardless of what they want. It tells us to set an example, and that's what he tries to do. And of course, his son Farid is who loves him dearly, also comes to love Stephen, his teacher, because he's so, as it were, obedient to the need to fit in. He wants to find an object of love there in his new community, and he's a rather touching boy, I think, at least as I read it, and of course sees what's happening to Stephen from a distance, but is able, in a way, to reach out to help him.
He also he notices as well, Muhiba. And
yes,
and
he falls in love with her. Yeah,
he's very much in love with her, and does. And I remember in the novel attends her, not a funeral, but some sort of service that's held for her. None of her family, none of her family members attend because she's been she's impure now in their mind. As I read the Kassab family, there's the quotations of scripture from the New Testament, from the Old Testament that the father makes. This is it's not a loopy syncretism. It's an awareness of the range of human inquiry into the divine and the value of that. But in a way, as I thought about it, maybe the larger question that the father confronts is in England that itself is not unsure, but quite frankly dismissive of its religious spiritual core.
Yeah.
And what must he think? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all he can think is to stay within his certainties and communicate them to his sons, and hope that his sons will be okay.
Yeah.
But this is one of the underlying themes, of course, of the book.
Your character, Laura Markham, the lawyer, we've mentioned her briefly. Is a young, upper middle class woman, rising, career-minded, focused, all of that, and she's the one mistakenly taken for sex trafficking purposes because she's put up in an apartment near the Angel Towers. They think they're getting Sharon Williams, and they get her. But I guess I wonder, did you put her in the novel to say, in effect, these problems won't stay contained within the Angel Towers? They will actually reach out and touch the upper middle class white lawyer.
That of course is the purpose of beginning the novel like that, and also. And in her story, I tell it in the second person case. She is you. That's part of the narrative. And so the reader is actually, as it were, totally identified with her, and seeing, and she's discovering bit by bit what it is, this world into which she's fallen, and the reality of it, from her dream world of being the successful middle-class graduate, investigative accountant. Everything lies before her, although she's already had her troubles with men.
Yeah.
But she's also trying to keep her purity in the only form that it's available to an upwardly mobile English girl. But you discover, of course, through implications, that she's had a Catholic upbringing, been to a private school, absorbed quite a lot of old-fashioned literary and musical experiences. She's not the ordinary piece of material that would fall into people trafficking, and that's part of the point. Yeah. If anybody else had fallen into it, the story would have a very different ending. But because she is what she is and has that extraordinary understanding of things, immediate understanding of things, she's able to lift one of her abusers, Eunice, out of his situation and give him for the first time the image of something else. And that's how she rescues herself. And you don't know at the end of the story whether Eunice himself might one day be rescued.
Yeah, no, they're interesting as well. Part of Laura's rescue, she's able to, by her wits, really outmaneuver and get out of the confinement she's in.
Yeah.
Part of her healing is to reach out, and as we were discussing, all of these characters converge. And so she reaches out and she becomes, in effect, another savior for Sharon. Williams, and their connections. Of course, they've been raped. That's one connection, but it's the realization on Laura's part. I think that she too is one of the only ones who could save Sharon from her fate.
That's right, but also she feels this because actually Sharon saved Laura.
Yes.
It's Sharon's. It's the example of Sharon holding on to her purity and the ability to love through all that she has suffered, which tells Laura that this is possible. And then she identifies with Sharon, and they as it were lift each other up.
The question as well. I mean, just sexuality within the novel. Thinking about this discussion. Is there something within the popular mindset that struggles to even understand this idea of a relational commitment of sexuality that has in part that it contributes in some way to this? I mean, this isn't just pure violence going on in the novel. It's in a way, and we see this through the two male characters maybe, of sexuality as expressive individualism versus relational commitment. And is it the thing that the latter, we really can't dispense with it as much as we want, even though we want to?
Well, that's true. I mean, it's been a theme of my writing for quite a long time, ever since I wrote the book on sexual desire, which came out, in 1986, I think, 30 years ago. That sexual desire is not the thing that it's been caricatured as being by the Kinsey Report and by, American campus habits. It is something completely different. It's a wanting of the other individual, a wanting of him or her for the thing that he or she is, and also the urge towards commitment, towards existential choice, is implanted in the heart of it, and that is a theme throughout the novel, of course. It's the only reason why rape is a crime equivalent to murder. It's a crime equivalent to murder because sexual desire is not the sort of thing that people like Alfred Kinsey try to make it out to be. It is a thing in which one's very existence as an individual is bound up, and that is especially true, of course, for a woman. And all the women in the story make this entirely clear.
On this theme of love and existential choice, Justin Fellows, the facts we're given in the novel is this is someone ascending in the world of enviropreneurialism or something like that, green capitalism. Justin Fellows, when Mahuba is taken from him, as he believes, one day, and he can't find her, and he's related to Stephen in that what he wants to find and protect, and he can't do it. He quickly loses all interest in his career, which has meant so much to him, and his solace is in heavy metal. And I think the social worker coming back, she reemerges. She's really the only one that he finds a connection with in that space until Laura returns. But maybe talk about that a little bit and what he's discovering about himself that he's casually dismissed most of his life.
Well, he is, as you say, a sort of eco-capitalist type. I mean, he is somebody who's, like all good people, he started life with ideals. He's gone through the modern university education system in which ideals are not the old religious self-sacrificing ideals, but they are the new political, egalitarian, and sort of anti-capitalist ideals, the ideals of people who feel that the world must be put to right, rather than that the self should be put to right. So he sets about finding a career, and because he's part of the environmental movement, he's very lucky. He finds a career plastering the Yorkshire moors with wind farms, which of course is an extremely dubious sort of thing in the end. Everybody knows that they have virtually no effect on the environment and also destroy a beautiful piece of countryside. And he comes, of course, to see this, and he comes to see that his environmental enthusiasms are not only misplaced because it's not going to do any good, but also that they are a cover for something else, for his lack of the real manhood that he needs. And the real manhood, his need for this, is made clear by Mahibba precisely by her refusal of him. That a real man has to break through the incredible barrier by which she is surrounded, and he doesn't know how to do it. And in his puzzlement, of course, he takes refuge in his love for heavy metal. He's a bass player himself, and he can, he really understands it. So one of the themes is actually the way in which someone like that can find his lost masculinity, as it were, returned to him through heavy metal. And I think this is something that you see very much in America, actually, the way in which a lot of your motorcycle gangs, who are obviously, as we know from recent events, in desperate search of their masculinity and will take any method to get hold of it, how heavy metal also has a very great importance for them. This is the way, in a world which has been, as it were, feminized, in which the women have taken over but also rejected the men, as the feminists do, that it's men are in many ways lost. How do I become a real man again? And so I go into some of the thoughts behind the heavy metal groups and also the style of their music too.
Yeah, no, you do that at length in the novel, and I thought that was so an interesting turn. In relationship to music, however, with the heavy metal, Justin as he's with Laura in the novel, and she is dealing with kind of the fallout and the trauma of her rape ordeal. He begins rediscovering classical music with her, which I thought was an interesting sort of way that, in a way, perhaps what you were signaling is. His manhood has found maybe a more appropriate channel with Laura, also realizing as you were just saying, the falseness of the egalitarian enviro ideals he had, and he's actually what he's finding is a center, and as a result, the heavy metal becomes of lesser importance.
That's right. Yeah, he does actually find his manhood through Laura, as she finds her femininity through him. So there is a happy ending as well as some pretty tragic endings in the book.
Stephen Haycraft will go to jail, and for a year for false imprisonment of Sharon. She comes to live with him finally. He avoids that. He avoids it, and then finally he realizes he has to take her in. Or she's going to be killed. She's going to be captured. He does that, but yet he is kind of a part of his character of a reluctance to go ahead and tell authorities that he has her. He delays that. He enjoys having her in his apartment, even though no sexual relations pass. He just likes being with her that much, I think. And he's really the one. He's really the sacrificial lamb here. He's going to lose his career, hard to recover from the taint of pedophilia, and that's not what he engaged in. But in fact, I think she would be of the age of sexual consent in any event. But it's all there for him. To become a man involves becoming a victim of some kind, and in the country, as you note, there's this hysteria over pedophilia because it seems to be the
Yeah.
last sort of sexual wrong acknowledged.
That's right. Yeah, that's in our society, because everything is permitted. There's a desperate need to find the thing that's not permitted, and children are the last remaining uh, area of innocence, the last thing that can be polluted. So we're constantly aware that at least that must be held on to. But also for that very reason, people become obsessed with it. The taking away of innocence, the gap, the transition from innocence to knowledge in the sexual sphere is a fundamental part of sexual morality. So this is the last little bit where real sexual morality still has some kind of presence in people's lives, and that's one reason why we see all this hysteria about paedophilia, which has been incredibly strong in Britain. As you might have seen recently, people going back 50 years in order to unearth something from somebody's life that will destroy his career on the edge of the grave, or destroy him on the edge of the grave. And, of course, Stephen falls into this trap, even though, as you say, Sharon has reached the age of consent. Nevertheless, teacher, pupil, priest, confessor, confessional relations have been targeted in particular because they seem to provide the opportunity that everybody is obsessed by. So he becomes a target for this, and once you're tarred with that brush, that's the end of your life.
Yeah. No, there is. I mean, there's as you think about Stephen, I suppose there's perhaps hope in what's happened, and that somehow he emerges.
Yeah.
He does meet Sharon at the end, who is at this point a university student, and seems on her way to a much better life. And perhaps go ahead.
Yeah. Well, she hasn't forgotten her obligation to him, and she will. The reader feels that she will save him, but she's going to have to make a lot of sacrifices.
Yes. Just thinking about in general, I was wondering if all of these sorts of events, I mean, incredibly controversial. I mean, at times as I'm interviewing here, I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I wonder how is something like the Rotterdam report. Does that have any sort of long-lasting impact? Any sort of 1,400 girls preyed upon over the course of 10 years and nothing was done? Does that have any sort of impact long-term, or is it just lost, or is the war lost?
Well, I just don't know. I mean, I'm hoping that I think I'm hoping that obviously things will change. But it needs a change in the culture. It's not just enough to have a change in policing.
No, yes.
We have to wake up to the things that have disappeared and try and recapture them. And it means being much more serious about young people and their predicament than we are. And it's not as though it's confined to England. It's all over the Western world.
Yeah.
We abandon young people to their sexual fortune, so to speak. And it's very obvious on American campuses. We just let things go out of hand. And then, of course, all kinds of self-inflicted punishments and revenge movements come into being. Everything moves into a state of antagonism and chaos. I think we're at a crucial point. I'm hoping that in an ideal world, my novel would be a bestseller everywhere, especially on the American campus, and everybody would realize, yes, of course, sex is the thing, this kind of thing, that has to be protected, and people must reincorporate it into a proper sense of their cultural identity and all the rest. I doubt that will happen. If it sells 100 copies, at least that would be good.
No, I think it's going to sell more than 100 copies. I was wondering, so it came out in the last few months. What's the reaction you're getting presently?
Well, I think everybody who I speak to has read it has been moved by it. But it hasn't got very widely reviewed yet. It gets its Amazon reviews and those sort of things. I just have to wait and see if it catches on. It's only been out for a month or two, so. But I mean, obviously, I'm hoping that someone will pick it up here, like you have done.
Yeah.
It would be great if it could be reviewed in National Review or somewhere like that. But I need to do some work on that, I guess.
I can tell you there will be a review in Law and Liberty quite soon that I have scheduled. I suppose maybe as we end, in a way, I think the novel gripped me, not just the story. I think you have a very compelling story, one that I think could actually be made into a film. I think it would be an incredible film. But in a way, we have, I think, the ultimate indictment of left liberalism, of a pervasive kind, and its commitments, which seem to prevent and dissuade people from dealing with horrible accounts of abuse. It seems to me there's just no greater indictment of an ideology, and the combination, as I was saying, of multiculturalism, the welfare state, and this sort of cult of autonomy than what you've revealed in the novel. And so I've enjoyed reading it and discussing it with you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, bye.
This is your host, Richard Greinch, and you have been listening to a podcast that can be found at libertylawsite.org, where you can subscribe, comment, and find other episodes and links related to today's conversation. Our email address is lal@libertyfund.org.